This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible with a copy of the game provided by Ratalaika Games. Shoot-'em-ups for the Mega Drive and Sega Genesis comprise a surprisingly rich tapestry of titles that generally run the gamut from awful to fantastic. It may not be on the level of the PC Engine, at least to us, don't at me on that. I'm not looking to argue about it yet again. But there's some really good stuff here. Titles such as Aeroblasters, Darwin 4081, Granada, and of course Musha Alesta are some of my personal highlights. And while it's not a shmup per se, Gunstar Heroes is probably the most timeless game on the system to me. Again, don't friggin' at me. But there's this one game I've been itching to try, and no, that's not just my dust allergies flaring up. Advanced Busterhawk Gleylancer has been elusive. Prohibitively expensive at auction, no longer available through Wii Virtual Console, and with a reprint that was sold out immediately due to scalpers, getting it has been challenging. Until now. Ratalaika Games is bringing us the goods on Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox. In this episode of Bullet Heaven, we're finally taking a look at Gleylancer.
Stick to it and believe in your power.
Advanced Busterhawk Gleylancer is a Yoko side-scrolling shoot-'em-up originally developed and published by NCS Messiah for the Sega Mega Drive in 1992. Though its Mega Drive version was only released in Japan and Korea, it would later see release to the Nintendo Wii Virtual Console in 2008 across all regions. A very limited Mega Drive reprint was also released by Columbus Circle in Japan on June 20th, 2019. It, like the original, has fallen victim to hyperinflated auction prices. However, Gleylancer today was published by Ratalaika Games for the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4 and 5, and Xbox Series consoles on October 15th, 2021, making Gleylancer the most accessible it's ever been. But that's not all. It has an all-new localization and even a number of great quality of life improvements. And this version of Gleylancer really came out of nowhere, with this announcement preceding its release by only 9 days. So let's get into it and take a closer look. The average shmup circa 1992 was generally very similar to others in the genre, especially in the home space, so some really cool hooks and an edge in presentation were definitely needed to stand out against the pack. Gleylancer does this in a couple of ways. Outside of the run-of-the-mill Hard 8 movement setup and single shot button lies an intricate set of controls that gives players quite a bit more control than on Mega Drive. Since modern consoles have a ton of inputs to choose from, an optimal setup exists for any player, which can be applied in the metagame menu before launching the game or via the minus button. In our case, we used the Hori Real Arcade Pro 5 Hayabusa arcade stick and changed up the controls for a rather comfortable gameplay experience. On the outside of the game, players are tasked with setting up the mover system for the Busterhawk's gunners by choosing one of 7 formations. Gunners are additional turrets that fire a wide assortment of ordnance depending on the ones collected. Players can collect these gunners one at a time to a maximum of 2. Each mover system features a different behavior to assist the Busterhawk's pilot in hitting targets more or less in any direction. However, the mover chosen is not set in stone. Players can cycle through all of the different formations available on the fly, allowing for a high degree of flexibility. The catch is, if the formation desired is missed, the player will need to cycle all the way through again. Over time, this shouldn't be much of an issue, but it will definitely take a bit of memorization. As is the case with all of the greatest shooters, it goes a little further. Each mover can either be locked in place to better attack enemies in various directions or switch between multiple programs, indicated with the number in the HUD. In addition to the wide variety of fire types and mover systems, players can also adjust the speed of the Busterhawk through 4 levels. In this version of the game, players can either cycle through them all first up, then down with a single input, or move the Busterhawk speed up or down manually with multiple inputs. All 3 can be assigned for greater ease of manipulation, which is super duper handy. As was the case with many of NCS Messiah's games, Gleylancer is a rather cinematic one and is played over the course of 11 stages. This makes for quite a slow burn. A shooting experience that lasts a considerable amount of time from beginning to end. Gleylancer also features 4 difficulties for players of various skill, though the normal setting feels very good for lower to mid-intermediate players and maybe even higher skilled novices. For those looking for a higher degree of challenge though, hard is where you want to be, with an unlockable Maniac mode allowing for players to go even further. This particular release also makes it easier for players to take on and overcome even the most difficult sections of the game with some great features. For players looking to practice troublesome stages, and there are some nasty ones if you're not expecting it, a series of 6 save states can be employed to start right at the beginning of the stage, or indeed the spot where things always seem to go down. But of course, that's not all. This version of Gleylancer also includes an incredibly handy rewind button, allowing players to reverse their progress in an attempt to overcome an obstacle, enemy, or shot in real time. This is a great way to experiment with daring approaches, though it's less good for practice overall. These features all apply to the modern gameplay mode, which even allows players to manually control the gunners with the right analog stick in kind of a faux twin stick manner. No matter the direction, the Busterhawk's main cannon will also fire. What a novel twist! This is exactly the sort of thing that I hoped would make it into the Guardian Force Saturn tribute release, but yeah. Meanwhile, a vintage mode also exists, which is a pixel-perfect representation of the Japanese original. It isn't localized, nor does it have a rewind function, though save states are still usable. A number of other features don't exist here either. Vintage does not allow players to cycle through mover programs, and only one input exists for speed change, which requires the player to cycle the Busterhawk speed settings in sequential order only. A cheater mode also exists, which could be pretty fun. All of this comes together to make for a very smooth gameplay experience, though Gleylancer is not without problems. The biggest of them, unsurprisingly, is shot and hazard visibility. There are a lot of small obstacles and bullets that do an exceptional job of blending into the backgrounds of many stages. I 100% needed my glasses for this one. Of course, as players come to grips with where everything is placed and where everything approaches from, cheap collisions with bullshit obstacles should fall sharply. We also had problems with the option menu in-game. Going into it from the title screen often selects a difficulty we don't want right out of the gate, and it's never really clear if any changes we make are applied. I mean, it looks like it does, but it can really mess with gamers that suffer from menu OCD. Finally, in the spirit of unbiased honesty, as good as the control feels, and it feels very good, there is an extremely tiny amount of input delay. Just like an itty-bitty tiny amount. It's so slight that we're not even really sure if it's actually there, but we think it is, and it's essentially a non-issue. Gleylancer plays very sharply despite it. Outside of these issues though, I have to say I really enjoyed my time with Gleylancer. This is definitely a game that I'll be going back to, though admittedly there is one other rather glaring shortcoming that we still have to address. The scoring system in Gleylancer is stupidly simple. Just shoot anything you see. Through the 11 stages, players will travel through. Enough points will be obtained for the player's lifestock to make it into the double digits, which is easy enough to do when you factor in the sporadic 1-up items. Collecting weapons will also increase the player's score by 1,000 points apiece. Extend after extend is a nice thing to have, but one thing that would also have been a nice thing to have would be an online leaderboard of some kind. There's nothing at all here outside of the game's own local leaderboard, which is, at the very least, saved to the system in modern mode. I guess it's up to the good old screenshot button then. Outside of gameplay innovations, early 90s shoot-'em-ups often turn things to 11 with an attempt at a stellar presentation. Great music and fancy visuals were an absolute must at the time, and Gleylancer definitely delivers. First up, the visuals. There are some absolutely gorgeous backgrounds here, often with just a gigantic amount of parallax scrolling. Gleylancer nails it straight out of the park in the first stage as the player flies through the rings of a nearby planet. It's a stage that has always stuck out in my mind ever since the Wii Virtual Console release. On the other side of things, the enemy design is kinda generic, but it works, and the bosses are adequately detailed as well. We really kind of wish the playership was more detailed too. The player's weapons are suitably nifty, but not especially flashy. But speaking of flashy, we've never really been a fan of the flashing outline of the Busterhawk or its gunners. Even though we don't like it much, it's still a super helpful feature that allowed us to better see our ship. We can only imagine how hard it would have been to see the ship otherwise. On the sound front, boy, Gleylancer has quite the soundtrack. It's just great, adding the right amount of flavor to the action on screen in all the right ways. The sound effects can sometimes be a little on the grating side, but that's par for the course on the Mega Drive after all. Gleylancer also features a number of voice samples, all of which are distorted and scratchy. That's quite unfortunate. Task Force Harrier EX, this is not. Gleylancer also has a rather coherent plot, and is told through the use of cutscenes throughout the game. These cutscenes would normally consist of Japanese text, but the modern game mode is fully localized, allowing English players to easily understand and enjoy the plot. Because we all play shmups for the plot, am I right? On the UI side of things, Gleylancer has a very typical HUD for its time. It wouldn't be out of place alongside games like Whip Rush, Zero Wing, or Thunder Force. Meanwhile, the wrapper UI is clean and easy to navigate. There's nothing to confuse the player with regards to where they need to go or what they're accessing. Gleylancer also includes a number of display options, including screen size, scan lines, and wallpapers. All in all, this is a pretty comprehensive release, but how does advanced Busterhawk Gleylancer stack up? Let's take a look. We think there is the faintest whisper of input delay here, but it might as well not exist. Gleylancer still plays more than sharply and responsively enough. The added modern functions and twin-stick control is pretty neat. Great for novices and intermediate players with hard and maniac difficulties for veterans, Gleylancer is a game anyone should be able to pick up and play. Well, pick up and play we say, but with 11 stages and all kinds of story and replay potential, Gleylancer should last players a good amount of time. It makes for a very long playthrough. With its amazing background and clean cutscenes, Gleylancer should be topping out in the visual category, but the unfortunate reality is, there's a lot of shots and hazards that get very easily hidden, and result in some cheap, bullshit deaths. Despite the crunchy VO, the excellent OST in Gleylancer makes up for it in spades. Never mind the extensive mover system and fun weapons, the addition of modern amenities like save states, rewind, and intuitive twin-stick control is really great stuff. So why not online leaderboards? Gleylancer is priced very low at just $7 US. That is an excellent value by any measure. But for an historically expensive, difficult to procure Mega Drive game, you just can't go wrong. Gleylancer is a really fun ride, like really fun. Though this version of Gleylancer was more or less a complete surprise, it was definitely worth the wait to check it out now. Advanced Busterhawk Gleylancer comes highly recommended. You can get a copy of Gleylancer on the Nintendo eShop, PSN, or Xbox Store for just $7 US. Links below. Man, it's a good thing I got a new job. Getting a Mega Drive version of this one should be a little easier at least. Up next on Bullet Heaven, a Sega Saturn classic reborn on Switch and PlayStation 4. Panzer Dragoon Remake is coming up next. We'll see you all in the next episode.